and welcome to Diverse and Inclusive Leaders, the podcast show where I interview the most inspirational and thought-provoking leaders of today and unearth their unique stories of diversity and inclusion to help inspire, educate, and motivate others to make the world a better place. Today, I'm thrilled to be joined by the fantastic Stacey Copeland. Stacey is a public speaker, professional boxer, and also founded the foundation Pave the Way, which I'm really looking forward to learning much more about today. She's also a BBC radio presenter and specialises specifically within the sports arena. Welcome to the show, Stacey.
Welcome, and thank you so much for having me. These kind of conversations really are important, so I'm just delighted to be having this conversation today. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Stacey. And I'm absolutely dying to know, and I'm sure that all of our listeners are in addition, how did you come to be where you are today? Because you seem to be wearing so many different hats. You know, obviously you're a professional athlete, which is incredible. And I know you used to be a former England footballer and hold one of the Commonwealth titles. I'm just so curious to know, how you landed up where you are right now.
In terms of football, I started playing when I was sort of 6 or 7 years old, but there were very limited opportunities for girls back then. And in terms of boxing, my dad was a boxer, my granddad ran our boxing gym. So again, I was involved with the sport from 6 or 7 years old, but back then for women in the UK, boxing was illegal. So I never got the opportunity to actually compete. So for years I went into football, and that was, led to some amazing opportunities. So I was very fortunate in that way. Really, when I'd done everything that I wanted to do in football, which was play for England, play in the FA Cup final and play abroad, I'd done all of those things, and boxing by then was legal, and there were, more and more opportunities coming up for women in boxing, and I'd never lost that hunger and desire to know if I could have done it. So that's how I ended up going into boxing. And then, I've just taken the opportunities that have come my way, really, things that I never thought I would be doing, but I've given them a go, and it's ended up being things like the public speaking. Certainly I always enjoyed speaking in schools and community groups, and the first couple of times I got asked to speak to businesses, I really did not think that would be my thing, but it's turned out to just be something that I've absolutely loved. It's totally changed my perception of business, and I've loved doing it. So yeah, I've just been very fortunate to be given opportunities and that people have believed in me, and so that's how I've ended up doing lots of different things. And I think doing loads of different stuff suits my personality and my energy levels anyway.
Well, I can tell that you've got a huge amount of energy, because I've watched with great interest some of the YouTube videos and the pieces that have shown your experiences and the charity, on YouTube, and listen to you on the radio. So I can tell you've got a huge amount of energy. And I'm so curious to ask, I mean, first of all, I can't believe in the modern world now that we live in that boxing was actually illegal, not too long ago. I think that's absolutely crazy, for females, that is. Talk to me about some of the experiences that you had, because clearly, your father, who was a boxer, was very enthusiastic about this, and perhaps encouraged you to do that. What were some of the challenges that you came up against when you went through the sporting career as a young, child to becoming a woman almost?
Well, in football, the barrier as a kid was that the Football Association, although the ban was lifted on women's football in 1971, the FA didn't officially recognise it until 1993. So when I was in, primary school, I wanted to play football, and I went and played for the team. And by another team coach and parent was, they insisted that I should leave the pitch because I was a girl, which was a horrible experience. So I insisted on having my hair cut short so that I could pretend to be a boy and play on the team. And that led to a lot of problems at school with people saying, why do you want to be a boy? I never wanted to be a boy. I just wanted to play football, and that was the only way. So that was certainly a barrier. Then as things started to progress, and the FA did then, and certainly now, are doing a great job for women's football, there were a lot more opportunities. So I think the next problem, in terms of, opportunities were getting more and more. The next problem I seemed to find was attitudes. So for example, when I got my first England call up when I was 16, I worked at a wholesaler's, and there was no sort of holidays left available for the week I needed to play for England. So I went to see my boss, And I said, you know, I need a week off, but there's no availability. So he said, what do you need a week off for? So I gave him my England letter, which, you know, it's the most exciting thing ever to get that first England letter with the official 3 lions on it. And you're just beside yourself. It's, you know, it's your dream coming true. And he just kind of went really, really quiet. And then he looked at me and he said, you expect me to give you a week off to play for a women's football team? And I said, well, it is the England women's football team. And he just like laughed and made all these jokes and innuendos. And I said, look, it really means a lot to me. Can I just take it unpaid? And he said, well, if you must. And I came out of that interaction feeling really small and actually feeling silly and a bit ashamed, if anything, for thinking it was such a big deal to play for the England women's football team. And so that was another barrier. As we know, it's completely different now and things are much, much better. So those are some of the barriers in football. In boxing, the obvious first barrier was that I just simply wasn't allowed to do it because it was illegal. Now, when that was changed, it was fought in the courts in 1998. Thankfully, to Jane Couch, the boxer that, you know, and she had 2 female barristers that fought, it wasn't actually won on the basis of inequality against, you know, women as such. It was fought on the basis that it was an unfair advantage in terms of disadvantage in terms of being able to earn money. So that was actually what it came down to, was the fact that by not letting women box, they were stopping them from earning a living as a boxer, which is bizarre. You would think it was just, well, women should be allowed to box. That wasn't actually the premise of it. It was, you know, the stopping people from earning money. And, you know, the boxing board at the time gave a couple of reasons, one being that women surely would not be stable during the menstrual cycle, which we've heard many times before. And that was one of the reasons for us not to box, which of course is not a reason for a woman not to do anything. So these ridiculous things were what they were putting across as fact and reasons for us not to do that sport. You know, obviously they showed that to be ridiculous in the court, and then they had to accept women, and they had to say that it was a way of, they were stopping them from earning a living, or stopping Jane Couch from earning a living as it was at that time. So again, it was, you know, policy and all of that had to change initially. When that did, then, you know, we faced the issue of attitudes, which is still very, very much an issue, which I definitely found out, particularly when I won the Commonwealth title not so long ago.
Wow, what an incredible, incredible story. And it's just unbelievable, isn't it? I mean, I know that we say it's shocking and that wouldn't be allowed to happen now, but still there is a huge amount of inequality that exists, you know, not just around, you know, of course, gender diversity, but all different aspects of diversity. And, you know, it makes me terribly kind of sad and almost, you know, a small feeling of heartbreak listening to you talk so passionately about the things that you really wanted to do, but having to justify that so much just because you are female. Ultimately, it's just absolute madness, you know, that these limitations and these blockers almost are being put in the way seamlessly for, you know, old-fashioned attitudes and beliefs.
Absolutely. And I think this is where it comes down to, you know, we do talk a lot, and I hear it said a lot, that's why people in positions of influence and power and leadership, it's so important to have diversity, you know, on boards, in management. And I do think that's true, because I think it is really hard for people to think from other people's perceptions, you know, if they're not in their shoes, if you're not an ethnic minority, if you're not female, or if you're not a person with a disability, if you're not LGBT. I'm not LGBT, I'm not a person with a disability, I'm not an ethnic minority. So I know, you know, quite often their perspective, or people from those groups, it's not going to be at the forefront of your mind. But what the important thing is to recognise that does matter, and how can we, you know, rather than just thinking, well, I don't know about that, it's not my group, so therefore. And I feel that's what happens a lot when you haven't got that representation. So, for example, one of the other issues that stopped women from being able to compete was that the board used to say, well, when professional men box, you know, in the amateurs they wear a vest, but when professional men box, they don't wear a shirt. So how will that work for women? Well, when you've got a board of men, of course it's difficult for them. But if you had even one woman there, she would say, sports bras are fine. You know, we can compete in sports bras, or we can wear a vest or whatever. The attire that you wear needn't be a barrier. I mean, imagine that in swimming. People could have said, well, men have got different stuff. What do we do with them swimming? We just wear a pair of Speedos and it's all fine. You know, but imagine if that had stopped men from swimming for like 100 years. It's just about thinking about it differently. And so another example, that's personal to me is when I won the Commonwealth title, which was an amazing experience because I got to go to Zimbabwe to fight for the title, became the first British woman to win it. It was just an incredible experience, but I didn't get a belt, which obviously didn't feel good because that's kind of the point. And when I got back from Zimbabwe, I spoke to the head of the Commonwealth Boxing Council and said, it was an amazing experience, but not having the belt was massively disappointing to say the least. And he explained to me that the manufacturers of the replica belt had ceased production. So I said, well, what's that got to do with me? So he said, well, we do replica belts for women and real belts for men. So I said,
oh my
wow,
God.
okay, why is that? So he said, well, there's more money. So he said, well, there's more money in men's boxing. So I said, I know that, but if you're going to have no belt at all, surely, I should have had the option, even if it meant paying for it with my own money. I would have done, because I'm never, ever going to get that moment back again. And to be honest, I thought the worst moment would be straight after in the ring when I didn't have that belt. But it wasn't. It was actually when I came home, because everyone was so excited to see this belt. And they were all saying, it's coming home and can't wait to see the belt. I didn't have the heart to tell everyone I didn't have one. But I didn't know lots of my friends and family would be at the airport to surprise me. And I didn't have that belt to show them and to share with them in that moment. And that should never happen. That's not right. And it was really, that was a little bit heartbreaking for me to not share it with them. So I explained this to him and I said, it's not right. I said, okay, how quickly can I have a real belt? I'll pay for it myself. And he said, well, you can have one within a couple of weeks, but they are quite expensive. So unless you've got a sugar daddy, you probably won't be able to have one.
Oh my good God. It's just, makes your blood boil,
really
doesn't
hard
it?
To put into words. Well, my response was that, you see, and this is where, you see, when I had that experience 20 years before with my first England call-up, I didn't have a voice then. I didn't even know to use my voice. I didn't know how to challenge the way that boss treated me. And I almost was apologetic for even asking for that holiday and sort of, slumped away feeling bad about myself. And this shows that the journey that sports led me on is that, 20 years later, what I've become is a person who will use my voice and has given myself permission to use my voice. And so I chose to, challenge that in a way of not shouting and all of that, but to just say, you really shouldn't have said that. It was a very, very derogatory thing to say to someone who does work actually alongside sport and always has, and is proud to do so. And actually, I've just gone over there as a professional athlete, a dedicated professional athlete, and you really have just undermined me and spoke to me in a very patronising way. And this cannot happen to another female champion. It really can't. We need to do something differently then. And if there is a disparity in money, then, if it makes you feel better, make a belt that's cheaper, but that is always available then to females, if that's the issue, which they have now done, fair play to them. And this is the thing as well, we don't want to jump down everyone's neck as soon as they do the wrong thing or say the wrong thing, because sometimes, although it isn't right, it's not necessarily coming from a really mean place. They need time to see things differently. And, sometimes we can help with that. Although we're victims of it, using that word, that term loosely, do you know what I mean? But, we're on the other end of it. Sometimes it can be good for us to try and, help others see our point of view and how that is hurtful and derogatory, and that why they should do things differently, which, to be fair, when that challenge was given and the opportunity was given for that person to see it differently, they did. And now there is a Commonwealth belt for women. We got the first one in December 2018, and now it's available to others, and that's part of what Paving the Way is, other than it being a project. It's my personal mission in boxing to make things better for the next generation coming through, just as those have done who came before me.
That's so insightful, Stacey. And there was so many things that you just said there that were really quite poignant. I think when you mentioned there, I think you used the word victims, that we're not, and I think that is part of the change is, those diverse, in inverted commas, communities, whether it be LGBTQ+, whether it be gender, or whether it be, mental health or something like that, it is for us to be able to bring others on the journey. And you're right to say it doesn't always come from a mean place. I'm sure sometimes it does, and obviously those individuals should know better, but at the same time it doesn't always, and it takes time to be able to shape the narrative and to be able to really bring people along the journey. And that's why I think it's so fantastic what you're doing, not only with Pave the Way, which we'll get onto in just a second, but also the fact that you are taking it upon yourself to be a real model. I was going to say role models there, but I think also being a real model and being, you know, I can tell how down to earth you are, and actually just saying it as it is. You know, I'm sure there's lots of people out there who don't necessarily have that voice to be able to speak up and say, hang on a minute, you know, this is absolute bullshit, frankly, you know, and why, you know, or being able to take the time to educate individuals into why, you know, they should be looking at something from another person's perspective. But I think, you know, we do as, you know, diverse or individuals, the entire of humanity, I think, owes it to others to really be able to bring people on that journey and to be able to help them with that understanding and why it is better for the community, but also, you know, it's better for business as well, and that's been proved. You know, clearly, you know, I'm pleased that they're now making a female belt, because as things start to develop and equality becomes, you know, I hope more dial moved in the right direction, that actually it'll make commercial sense for them as well.
Well, that was the big thing last year during the World Cup, that if you think of that experience that I had with my own company, who I actually worked for, they had an England player on their staff, and that's the way I was treated. Yet you look at last year, you know, 20 years later, there's massive corporations desperately wanting to get involved with the women's teams in the World Cup, to be part of promoting it and part of this, you know, amazing thing that's happening in women's sport. And so it just shows you the amazing things that have changed. It's not just about participation and, you know, more opportunities. There is a commercial aspect to it. And for me, there's never, ever been a chicken or the egg. It drives me mad, this chicken or the egg line that we're given. And, you know, this is a big problem for change. These things that we continue to say again and again and again. Chicken and the egg is one of them, particularly in sport. The amount of times I've heard, well, it's chicken or the egg, you know, because, you know, if TV companies put it on and there's no money behind it, you know, then they can't get sponsorship. But if they're not on the TV, the sponsors won't be behind them, and the sponsors want to be on television, etc., etc. There isn't a chicken or the egg. Make people visible. Let them know it's happening. Let people be inspired. Then the sponsorship, the commercial opportunities, etc., etc., will come. That is what happens. So there's no chicken or the egg. It doesn't matter whether it's law, whether it's this, whether it's that. And yes, sometimes we need to do things different for women. Sometimes we need to do things different for people with disabilities or ethnic minorities or whatever. Whatever those barriers are or unconscious biases, we have to acknowledge that they're there and look at ways around them. And exactly like with the women's football, I took my niece last year to watch the Manchester City Manchester United game. Now they know the FA and all these individual clubs, they can't charge, you know, the astronomical ticket prices that you can for a men's game, because it's still in the developmental phase. So they made it cheaper for adults and free for kids. 31,000 passionate, enthusiastic families packed into that stadium, and it was an amazing, brilliant day, great game, great experience. They did things a little bit differently for the women's game. What is wrong with that? Sometimes that's just what you need to do to develop things, and it's not because we're victims or we need a leg up. It's because you know, when you think about corporate investment being less than 0.4% for women's sport, coverage across all media platforms has been less than 10%. And that's before you even get to social stigma and what we are and are allowed to do and what's feminine and what isn't, etc., etc. All the sports we've been banned from. If you look at where we've had to come from, then actually, yes, we should do it a bit differently, because it's not the same race. And people say to me all the time, when's women's sport going to catch up to men's? Well, it probably isn't, because it's not a fair race. Men's sport's already 80 metres of a 100-metre race. We're still at the start line. How is it even comparable? What we should be saying is, you know, let's look at how far women's sports come in and of itself. And when you look at it without comparing it, I think it's pretty phenomenal where we're up to. You know, there's been bans on lots of sports for women, only listed in the last 20, 30 years. Now we're performing at a very high level at the Olympics, in world championships. That's pretty phenomenal. So if you only compare it to men's sport, which really it's not comparable for all of those reasons I've just given, and you look at it in and of itself, it's a phenomenal story of triumph, overcoming adversity, which, by the way, of course, has been men and women are responsible for, you know, things being held back for both genders. And on the good side, men and women together are responsible for progress. You know, it's really important that we do it together. And so I think when you look at what people have achieved together, it's pretty phenomenal. And it makes me really optimistic about where we're going to be going forward.
That's such an inspirational piece that you've just said there, Stacey, and I think it leads incredibly nicely onto the organisation that you've created, which is, I really hope, the good news story that, I think you said in one of your pieces to the BBC, you hope that one day that doesn't exist, and you know what, Pave the Way will exist up until the point that there really is that equality across the entire board. Tell me, and do tell our listeners a little bit about the foundation and what you're doing with it and how we might be able to help and support you.
Okay, kind of came about in two ways. When I started as a professional boxer, quite a lot of boxers have a nickname like the Hitman Hearns or whatever it might be. I didn't have a natural boxing nickname because my nickname is SpongeBob, which is really not intimidating as a boxer. So we knew we couldn't really go with that. So, I didn't want to just make one up for the sake of it. And really what felt natural to me was have a slogan that I had on my kit and, that it's kind of had in my heart, but also on my kit was a slogan that I stood for. And Pave the Way, I don't know where it came from. It just felt perfectly right because I knew what I wanted to do with boxing was, yes, reach my own potential as an individual athlete, but equally to pave the way for the next generation so that hopefully they wouldn't face the barriers I have. They'll have their own barriers to face, no doubt about that, as every generation does, but not the same ones. That's what you want, isn't it? To leave it better than you found it. You don't want them facing the same stuff. It might be in a different way, but then, as I say, we want to equip them to fight their own battles and be inspired to make it even better. So Pave the Way was a slogan for me as a boxer. Then it was Women's Sport Week, which, used to happen for 1 week a year where, a lot of the TV channels, radio, whoever, covered women's sport for a week and then largely forgot it for the other 51 weeks of the year. And I'd done lots of other people's projects for Women's Sport Week, but I wanted to do my own. So we decided to make Pave the Way a 1 week project, which involved me going into lots of schools and talking about my experience in sport. A lot of free community sessions, sometimes boxing, sometimes with football, whatever. And then also we did a photography exhibition of women who work in sport, because athletes are quite visible now, but women who work in sport are quite invisible. And, it's important for young girls to know if they're, perhaps not good enough to earn a living as an athlete, or they're in a sport that doesn't provide a living, even if they're the best in the world, or that they're just not competitive and they just love sport but not actually doing it. I wanted them to know there's loads and loads of careers for you where you can pursue, your passion in sport and combine it with your skills, whether that's IT, logistics, PR, whatever it might be. So this exhibition is on permanent display in the Velodrome, and that's all it was really. And then I don't know, it just had so much momentum, and it seemed to just really resonate with people and inspire them, and it's just got bigger and bigger. So last year I wanted to make a commitment to pave the way in terms of what it means, which is your way of paving the way for the next group coming through. So because the public speaking was taking off, what I did was for every paid talk I did a free talk in a school. So it was a way of those companies paving the way for the next generation, and me doing so as well. So I did about 74 talks last year, which was a great experience.
Wow.
And, and just I think at first these things start out as a decision. And then when we feel an enormous drive and we have a massive why and a deep passion for it, it almost ceases to be a decision, and it's just like this massive driving force that you must do it. And that's how I feel about Pave the Way. So then it was the decision part was what to make it. Do we make it a charity? Do we make, and I'm not particularly driven by money, and it's something that I want to be able to provide for others. If there's small companies who can't afford certain things, or schools, if it, a way for them to pave the way. So submitted it to the Charity Commission. We're just going through that process at the moment of hopefully getting charity status. And I can't be an expert in every single industry, but what I do know is that through the public speaking, I've met people from loads of backgrounds that I never otherwise would have done. And the amount of women that come up to me after talks and say, my experience is just like yours. I work in law, I work in tech, I work in engineering. So it's become quite clear to me that this is an experience that lots of other women have in their industries. Also, there's a lot of men that have come up to me and said, you know, that they might have faced stigma for things, you know, that are considered not masculine, that they're interested in, or that they have children, particularly daughters, where they see this happening and they want it to be different too. Or it might just be the language that they use. And, you know, some men have come up to me and said, oh my God, I say all the time to my little boy, you know, if he's being showing a bit of emotion or whatever, I say, stop being a girl. I'm never going to do that again. Great. You know, if that's the bit of a change we can have. So I know it works by us sharing our stories, having this discussion. And like I say, I can't say the best way to pave the way for the next generations of women in law or, you know, dads or whatever. But if we can get people to think about this, and the premise the approach I take is question it, challenge it, change it. If people question the way that things are, because I find quite often, whether it's race or gender or anything, we don't question the way things are because it's always known. And therefore we say, you know, the amount of times I've heard that, well, that's just how it is. That's just the way it is. Well, I don't think that's good enough. So I think if we question things, so in the case of gender, is it the same for boys and girls? Is it the same for men and women? If it isn't, then we should challenge it and say, why not? Now, sometimes there might be a perfectly, you know, fine explanation as to why it's different, and we can say, okay, but if there isn't, if it's just because, well, that's just how it is, that's not good enough. So then the next step is to change it and say, right, I've questioned it, I've challenged it, there is a disparity, there is an inequality, how can I change it? The best people to do that are the people in those industries, I think. Yes, they need the tools, the resources and all of that, which, you know, hopefully Pave the Way can help with. But ultimately, you know, it's people in law who probably know, you know, they know better than anyone the barriers that they face. It's, you know, I don't know what it's like to be a male ballet dancer, but, you know, if they can see what difficulties they had, then hopefully they can change things to make it better for the next boys coming through who are passionate about ballet and so on. So it's about whether it's individual or whatever your sphere of influence is, whether as a parent on your own children, a manager in a company, you run a local club, you're a teacher, whatever it is. Once you see these things, you can't unsee them. And when you do, what are you going to do to change it and to pave the way? And if everybody does that bit, surely it's going to be better, because I just can't settle anymore for these attitudes towards, you know, that's for boys and that's for girls and that's it. You know, boys shouldn't do this, girls shouldn't do that. And I meet too many people now who need something to put their voice behind and something to be part of to change this. Lots and lots of parents. One I met a few weeks ago, whose little boy loves ballet, and he told me this heartbreaking story that he went to show his friend a picture of his little boy, just won a certificate, you know, for passing one of his levels in ballet. And his friend said to him, "Oh, what are you doing, mate? Are you raising a puff?" Which, aside from being homophobic, is really, really sad that dad felt so proud of his little boy. And yet his friend, that was the thing his friend felt he had to say, because it kind of went out the masculinity box. It's like, oh, that's a bit uncomfortable that his son's doing ballet. That's really, really sad. But even more importantly than that, people might not think these things are a big deal, but it's when you meet older people and other people who actually did have big dreams or just things that they absolutely loved doing that made them feel alive, that gave them a purpose, that they, you know, just gave them some amazing feelings that they stopped doing because of the stigma of gender. That's really where it really, really matters, and we shouldn't be willing to accept that anymore.
That's so incredibly true. I agree with every single thing that you've just said there, and I absolutely love how passionate you are about making a difference. I think the more that we talk about these things, the more that people start to be able to see through the eyes of another. And I love the quote, quote you back here, actually saying that once you've seen these things, you can't unsee them. And so actually we should all be taking responsibility to be able to change and understand how each and every individual looks at the world. Because at the end of the day, if you strip everything back, you know, we are all human beings and we all have feelings and have a heart, you know, regardless of who, what, where we are from in this world.
Absolutely. And like I said, I think I alluded to it a little bit earlier, but, you know, yes, like you've quite rightly said, some people just want to be mean. In some instances, there isn't a great deal of point in having a discussion if they're just very, very racist or very sexist, very whatever, very homophobic, whatever, sometimes you really can't get anywhere, you know, and you just have to accept that. You know, it's sad and it's horrible, but it is a fact of life, and, you know, you can't do anything. But in most cases, I really believe that human beings are good, and once they sort of make a connection with, so a lot of the times people are really against women boxing, but then they hear my talk and I become a human being in front of them. I'm not just a female boxer, and it's too difficult then to say women boxers are this or they're that, because when there's a real human being in front of you, I'm not talking about necessarily just through the narrative of being a female boxer. I'm talking about the experience of feeling excluded. That is a human experience. It's not the experience of an ethnic minority or person with a disability or any of those groups you want to pick. It is a human experience, and everybody has felt it, whether that's being left out when the school team was being picked, or I've even heard people say, because I asked people what their experiences have been, in some cases it's they walked a different route home to school than their friends and felt left out. They were 11 years old. Now they're 50 years old and they still remember how that felt, because it has a powerful impact on us feeling left out. So it's, you know, it's that experience of exclusion that actually brings us together. And I think where, yes, there are some very mean people because they've been brought up with those ideologies, there's a lot of other people who it's just never been challenged in them. They've just never thought about it any differently because no one's ever said it, or they've never seen the person who represents that, or never had the chance. And even if they have thought it, they've been too scared to say it at the fear of somebody saying, you can't say that. You know, so it's important that people feel comfortable and safe to discuss these things in a way that, you know, they can learn about it and explore it. And, you know, people might say the wrong, you know, so-called wrong thing or whatever, but that's all right. If they're willing to hear that side and work through it with you, then that's good, isn't it? Because there is a connection. Like I say, that you know, that exclusion is a human experience, and everybody's felt it. And even if you can only resonate on that level, then fine. And then we can make these little changes which add up, even if it's like the language you use. So not saying you girl as an insult. Why do we use gender as an insult? That's ridiculous. And labels. So, you know, I've represented the country in 2 sports. Often people will describe me as a tomboy. Well, I don't find that massively offensive, but it's not the right way to describe a professional female athlete, because if you just say, oh yeah, she's a right tomboy, you're not saying like, what I've achieved, what I've overcome, who I am, what I stand for. Likewise, it's not the right way to describe a little girl who just happens to love sport. So, you know, I think the language and stuff that we use, even if we start there, that's a good thing, because it, you know, words can be really quite important, and then it gets to a point we just don't question anything, and we do need to question it because things need to change, because it really does impact people's lives. And there's our next photography exhibition for Pave the Way is 4 girls and 2 boys. For example, one of the girls is a freestyle skateboarder. Another one is a taekwondo player. She's national champion. And we've got a male ballerina. And we know one of the boys' mums who we talked to, he does ballet, and she said he loved ballet from an early age, just loved it. He's constantly doing it around the house, but he would not go to lessons. And the main 2 reasons were that he thought he'd be the only boy. Secondly, he was worried about the stigma. He knew he'd be laughed at, called names, and there'd be, you know, assumptions about his sexuality, like there is for me. A lot of people assume I'm gay. I don't know why, because it's nothing to do with the sport that I do, but this is what stereotyping does. So he wouldn't go to lessons. She finally convinced him to go. When he'd been, the teacher said to her, my God, your child is a freak talent. He is now at the Royal School of Ballet in London. They only have 12 kids in every year group. That's from across the world. That just shows you what an incredible level of talent that kid has. Now, you imagine if he hadn't gone for that ballet lesson, what a massive part of his identity in his life would have been taken away and never would have even been realised or reached his potential. That's really, really sad. So the fact that that's still happening, I just want to do something about it, and I want that to change.
I think it's so wonderful what you're doing. And on the exclusion piece, reverting back to what you're saying, you know, this must touch absolutely everyone. It does touch everyone. You know, they always say people never remember what you say or what you did or where you were, but they always remember how you feel. And so I would say to any of our listeners who have been tuning in today and listening to all the fantastic stories that you've been telling, and I can see them kind of vividly in colour as you're speaking through them. I'm sure that they have resonated with many individuals who've been listening, but we certainly all have felt a certain way and all felt, I'm sure, excluded at one point in our lives. So you're right. If we are even just resonating or starting at that level, starting somewhere is the key, because we can build up from there, and I can't believe the piece there, that you were talking kind of about, perhaps being a tomboy, and I'm doing exactly, I'm sure, what many people say to you after you've given such an incredibly inspirational talk is, the desire to then want to share their own story. But when I was just under 23, actually, I ended up entering into a powerlifting competition, and there was a couple of women who had entered, and I thought, oh my goodness. And people were saying, really, you've done powerlifting, don't you have to be, really kind of big and strong and everything like that? And it was, it's kind of embarrassing. The first piece that you do in a powerlifting competition is a bench press. And I remember the bench press didn't have any weights on. It was just simply the bar, which I think is 5 kilograms from memory. And there's quite a lot of sniggers in the room. And I felt terribly embarrassed and maybe even a little bit ashamed. I thought, what on earth am I doing? But then I ended up killing it right at the end on the deadlift, which was, I'm sure this is a micro amount for you, but 112.5 kilograms. And I still remember the feeling of, of joy when I ended up being the winner out of the only 2 females. But it was very unusual, then very, very unusual indeed. And so, absolutely resonate with all of the things that you're saying there. And I think the more that we can talk about it, the better this will be for humanity.
Absolutely. And I think, just one final thing I'd say on that is that, I'm not trying to convert people to women's boxing, women's sport, women's anything. What I'm just trying to say is that, just don't have that attitude that people shouldn't do something just because of the gender, or just because of their race, or just because of their, even their socioeconomic status. Like, just try not to do it. And it is hard. Naturally, we do have biases. We do. That's the way the brain works. But we have to work extra hard to acknowledge that they're there and find ways around them. And if people say that boxing's absolutely horrible, they are 100% right. It's a horrible, horrible sport. I just happen to love it, but I am aware it's a horrible sport. So saying boxing's horrible is fine, but saying that women's boxing shouldn't be allowed, that's different. And you don't have to like that someone's doing it, but for you to take it upon yourself to be horrible to them, like some people are on Twitter and wherever. And I was on the radio, it was a while ago now, it was at least a year ago, and somebody rang up and we were talking about, women's boxing in general. I never said, anybody who thinks I shouldn't be boxing, do you mind ringing in and letting me know? That was never a request of mine. I was just on talking about women's boxing like I'd been asked to do. Yet somebody took it upon themselves who I'd never heard of, who wasn't a boxer, who for some reason felt they had the right to ring up and say, women boxers are vile, and that the thought of women's boxing is vile. And the presenter said, what have you got to say to that? And I said, well, nothing. And he said, what do you mean nothing? And I said, for start, I'm not going to justify the thing that I spend most of my time working hard to be the best I can be at to somebody who doesn't have any idea what that process and that commitment is like. So for a start, I'm not going to do that. And secondly, you wouldn't have read that out if that was about race, for example. You wouldn't have read it out if someone would have said the equivalent about race. So for example, I don't mind swimming, but I don't like watching vile black people swimming. That would be a terrible thing to say, and they wouldn't have read it out. Likewise, I don't mind basketball, but not vile people in wheelchairs. Why am I vile for being a woman who does that sport? As it happens, I'm not a vile person anyway, but I'm not vile just for doing that sport. If you want to say it's a vile sport, fine. But it becomes so socially acceptable if we're not careful to say that people are vile just because of something they do. Or so, and there's a danger in that, because yes, you can think, oh, I'm not keen on it, but you don't need to be horrible in that way. Do you know what I mean? You might say it's not for me and I don't want to do it, but not, that's where we get into this thing of people being prevented because people say these horrible things and they feel really like okay saying it. I would never dream of saying something like that to someone and saying they're vile just because they do a sport or whatever. It's just, I find it a bit bizarre, but I know it goes on. But I just think, if it's not for you, fine, but you don't have to be horrible about that person doing it because you don't understand it, or because they're different to you, or you've never met somebody who does that. you know, just find judging in that way, just based on race or gender, is quite damaging, and it can be ultimately end up being very, very limiting if we allow these this you know kind of rhetoric to become very socially acceptable. I think there's a bit of a risk in that, and I think, you know, to be called vile on a radio station when you're actually supposed to be there for something positive, it's not hurtful, because you know, I assume it wasn't meant from a hurtful place, but it's just not positive and it's not helpful to what we're trying to do. And sport in particular, you know, I'm just extremely fortunate that I happen to have a love and a passion for one of the most powerful things on the planet for making change. It transcends things, and look what it's done for LGBT and for race with, you know, Colin Kaepernick in America, and, you know, years and years ago, you know, there was leading sports people who sort of defied even Hitler and things at the Olympics. It's phenomenal what sport can do and how it can make a difference, whether it's on an individual level, someone changes their lifestyle and does a 5K run, or on a massive level where football, for example, is used very effectively in areas of conflict and so on. You know, I myself went to the Calais and Dunkirk refugee camps and did sport for a week with the children. You know, I'm aware of how powerful sport is. So any advances for men, women, ethnic minorities, people with disabilities, whatever in sport, will transcend and impact other areas of life, like the workplace, home place. So that is actually where it's very important as well. It's not just about sport or my feelings or, you know, anything like that. It does have an impact on other areas of life in a positive way if we let it.
Thank you so much, Stacey. Honestly, I can say I think that's been one of the most inspirational and thought-provoking podcasts that we've done in the series. And one final question just before we summarize. For those who are tuning in today, what's the one piece of advice that you would perhaps give them to take away from the talk today?
My plea, if you like, would be for people to think about how they can pave the way. It doesn't have to be to do with, you know, with gender, but certainly when we're talking about diversity and inclusion, you know, think about how you can pave the way. It might seem so small and insignificant, but it all adds up and it matters, and every single one of us, every voice counts. Now, you might have a very loud voice like me, and you might be comfortable going to speak to loads of people, or you might not, but there'll be a different way that you can make a difference. And I think knowing your why is dead important. I really believe in that saying, that if you know your why, you can endure almost anyhow. It doesn't have to be a very personal why, though. You can join a movement that someone else has set up that really resonates with you, and that becomes your purpose, and you be part of that. That's absolutely fine. Just, you know, to know why you're doing it and pursue it with your whole self is brilliant, and you will make a difference to others. And I think the last thing I'd say, you know, I love the quote from Brene Brown that you can choose courage or you can choose comfort, but you can't have both. And that is dead right. And, you know, when you go into the arena, I mean, as a boxer, you literally step into an arena and get in the ring. And, you know, the different arenas that I'm in, whether it's on the radio, whether it's doing a podcast like this, whereas it's being a boxer, whether it's doing Pave the Way, there's different arenas. And, you know, as you do more, the arena that you're stepping into gets bigger and bigger. Your reach gets bigger, your audience gets bigger. That means there will be a lot of people sat in those seats, and there will be people who want to shout nasty stuff and throw things at you while you're in the arena. But like that quote about choosing courage or comfort, it's always worth it to choose courage, because if you passionately believe in it, you know your why, you know your purpose, whether that's yours or connected to someone else's, then it's always worth, no matter what's thrown at you, stepping into that arena and fighting that fight with courage, because none of us would be in the position we're in if the people who came before us hadn't done it, and thank God they did, because we are the recipients of that. I only got to go to America and play football on a scholarship because of all the men and women in 1972 who fought for Title IX. Before I was born, before I knew anything about it, and I benefited from it. I don't know those men and women, they don't know me, but I'm so grateful to them. And I'm now doing what I can because of what they did. And future generations might not know me, and I might not know them, but that's fine. We'll pass the baton on to them, and every single person can in their own way. So I would just, please don't anybody think it doesn't matter what you do, because it does. Even if it seems really small, it will make a difference. So find a way to pave the way, your own way. Don't think it doesn't matter, because it really, really does. And everyone's got something to bring to the table, and every single voice counts, and just do it with courage. And if you're struggling and feeling lonely with it, which I sometimes do, get back in touch with your tribe like a positive petrol pump, that when you're feeling low on that positive energy, go and fill yourself up with those positive people, because there's loads of them all wanting to make it better. and find them, and it'll give you that, full tank of positive petrol that you need.
What a wonderful note to end the show on with, Stacey. That honestly, words can't express it. You've just been absolutely brilliant today, and I love Brené Brown. I love the piece earlier that you quoted: question it, challenge it, change it, and hopefully, if even just a couple of people take that away with them today, and I'm sure there will be dozens. That the world can and will be a better place. Certainly with individuals like you in it. So thank you very, very, very much indeed for being on the show today. I really appreciate it.
No, thank you so much for having me. And like I said at the beginning, the work that you're doing is massively, massively important, because we need these conversations, and we need people like you who are willing. And even if people criticise it, say, oh, another podcast about this, or another thing, so what? Because it's helping and it's positive, and you'll be having a massive impact on a lot of people. So thank you for having me, and thank you so much for being committed to this and doing something about it. It really makes a difference. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Stacey. And for those tuning in, you can visit Stacey's website, which is www.stacey-copeland.co.uk, and you can find out all about her Pave the Way project. There's lots of videos and clips on there, so make sure you check that out. My name is Leila Mackenzie-Dellis, and you've been listening to Diverse and Inclusive Leaders, the podcast show with you every week. Visit www.dialglobal.org/podcast, or you can visit www.leilamackenzie.com/podcast, where you can check out all of the links and an annotation of the show notes from today's show with the marvellous Stacey Copeland. Look forward to seeing you next week. Thank you so much for watching the Diverse and Inclusive Leaders podcast. Please do feel free to hit the like button below, or if you'd like to receive future notifications, do ping the notification bell here at the side. If you're interested in the audio version only, you can find it on the following streaming platforms. Any extra info and descriptions will be in the links below. Look forward to seeing you soon.